Have you ever had those moments whereby you've been waiting for something for a long time? You've been looking forward to it, whether that's a trip, a drink, something to eat. You can almost taste it, and then it's finally in your hands. You've literally got it. You're just about to take a bite. And then, out of nowhere, everything changes. And that thing you've been waiting for just never happens. But enough about my trip to the beach, where a seagull took my pasty. Let's go and talk about the new era of Steven Gerrard. This is the Talk of the Trinity podcast. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Talk of the Trinity podcast. I'm Baz Barrett, and after what seems like an eternity, with me once more is Will Forrest. We've seen other people, we've gone through couples counselling, we're back together in the same room. Good to have you back, Will.
Mate, it's good to be back, you know what I mean? It's nice to be with you once again in person.
Enough of our couples reconciliation. We'll talk in terms of what we've got coming up for you on today's show. We're going to be talking about the appointment of Gerrard and our thoughts. Looking forward to the Brighton game on Saturday. And we'll also be hearing from a special guest who may or may not have also had similar experiences with seagulls stealing his pasty. But before we get to that, we're going to go through our usual roll call of social media channels where you can keep up to date with all things Villa, all things Talk of the Trinity. If you go to our Twitter page at Talk Trinity, if you can, what is that magic word?
You can follow us on our Twitter page and you can have a go at all of our really daft polls that we do. Much like, do you think we'll win at the weekend? We tend to do a starting 11 poll, which I won't spoil. I'll tell you the starting 11 that the followers have chosen later. And we do other little ones as well about formations mainly.
Yep. Any reference to polls, not to be confused with Matt Cash. So you can also go our YouTube channel at Talk Trinity, where you can subscribe to our channel so you get updates on when the latest episodes get released. You can watch the video, such as our previous two-parter, where you could see probably the highlight of the series so far. Dave from the Irish Lions, fantastic dance near the end of the second episode, so if the second half. So if you haven't checked that out, go and do that right now and then come back. It's worth it.
It's about 21 minutes into it because I went looking for it the other day. Those ones are also now grouped together with previous chats with international villains and Jamie Gray special under TOTT specials, so they've got their own little playlist also. Comment, let us know what you think. We've had a couple of comments, and also like our videos, much appreciated because it helps with the reach on YouTube.
And speaking of the reach, you can also download the podcast on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, Stitcher, some other ones probably.
Yeah, loads of them. I can't think at the moment, no.
But wherever you are, and we've got fans far and wide. We were looking at the stats, we're going worldwide, and thank you for that in terms of tuning in, listening to us, expanding the reach. Whether you're listening, watching, bit of both, much appreciate it. And we will continue to bring you all things Villa, which nicely links us on to the main topic of conversation. When we were last talking in terms of the first half podcast, we threw some names into the ring in terms of who may be the next Villa manager.
Yeah, we did. Very
quickly, the powers that be knew that Will was the person to listen to in terms of who to hire. So we went and got the business done. Hired Steven Gerrard. First game in charge will be Brighton this Saturday at Villa Park. So Gerrard in the hot seat at Villa. Guess he must be quite pleased.
Yeah, before I go into it, can I just give a big shout out to our American listener, Wes? Wes, how you doing? Thanks for listening. Really appreciate it. Steven Gerrard, mate, I tell you, I'll be completely honest, and I saw where Dave was coming from, where he wanted Paulo Fonseca, didn't really want Gerrard, he wanted someone a bit more proven at the time. I wasn't sure about Gerrard at first, but he grew on me, and then reading about his backroom staff, Super Mac, Michael Beale, and the rest of them, Milsom, it just seemed as though he would be a good fit for us, really. I got quite excited by him. To be honest with you, there was part of me that was thinking, well, if we don't get him, then I probably would have taken Frank Lampard, but I wouldn't have been as excited. I appreciate it's a bit of a... He didn't do too bad at Chelsea, really, considering he couldn't spend money for the first year, but that's by the by. Stevie G, I mean, you very much sat on the fence in that multi-villain special, part 1, the first half. Was there anybody who you were actually hoping for, or were you just very much like, no, this white picket fence is fine for me?
Well, I think in terms of if you could wave your magic wand and have anybody, I mentioned Ten Hag, who... That's a bit like saying, if somebody was going to give you a barrel full of cash, you'd take it. It's like, well, yeah, you would, but it's probably not going to happen, especially at my employment. But in terms of... I was kind of in a similar position to Dave from the Irish Lions in terms of a guess who style game was going on in my mind in terms of managers I was knocking off and then seeing who was left. I mean, you mentioned Frank Lampard. I mean, that's a reason to hire Steven Gerrard all by himself just to prevent us from getting Lampard. It's an appointment whereby you don't plan to sack somebody at this stage of the season, I don't think. I mean, the international break, I think, played a huge part in pushing the button now. The hierarchy of Villa mean, and we talked about it previously, there was a shortlist around in terms of in case of emergency, break glass here. And in terms of Gerrard, I'm growing into it. I mean, the thing you always say, which I think is ultimately the thing has to be borne in mind, is you support the club first, manager and players after that. And the Gerrard appointment, as has been touched on, the risk is he is having one eye on the Liverpool job. I think that's fairly obvious. But in terms of, you don't fail at Villa and then get offered the Liverpool job. So
True.
If he does end up going to Liverpool, then that means he's done a good job at Villa, which is a point you made in the previous podcast, and I agree with. But enough about looking in terms of him at Liverpool. Bringing it back to him at Villa, I believe it's a perfect job for Lampard. No, not Lampard, Gerrard. It's a perfect job for Lampard, but we weren't going to give it to him. But in terms of Gerrard, there was never any chance he was going to turn it down, because realistically, his stock at Rangers was at that perfect time to jump off into a bigger job. And you're looking in terms of Villa have money, but not too much money as compared to Newcastle nowadays. The expectations are too high for Dean Smith. I think we touched upon in terms of top 10, kind of that period, that part of the table obviously isn't enough for the ownership. They're looking for Europe as a minimum this season, but that's realistic. If you're looking in terms of 7th could get you Europe. I mean, I think I've said previously, I think it's a season too soon, but it's not beyond the realms of impossibility to come 7th in this league. Or if you get a decent cup draw, go and win a cup draw. So it's an expectation, but it's not qualify for the Champions League, win the Premier League, which is going to be an expectation if you are at a club like Liverpool, Man United, for example. And for Rangers, he's got a very good reputation in terms of winning the league title there last year, undefeated, which, even the great Rangers and Celtic teams of yesteryear, it's not a common occurrence. I mean, it's his only trophy in Scotland, which gets thrown at him a lot, but yeah, if you're going to do it properly. And in terms of his European record, is decent, I'd say, in terms of partly as a result of Rangers doing well in the last couple of years. It looks like automatic entry into the Champions League for a Scottish team from next year, which would have been, unheard of a few years ago when Rangers were losing to a part-time Luxembourg team and never reaches the qualifying campaign for the Europa League or whichever competition it was at the time. So you have to give him credit in terms of getting that belief mentality back into Scottish football. Celtic won't like to be included in that, but you need somebody pushing you on to make a proper rivalry, I think, and Celtic now have one, whether they wanted one or not.
Yes.
But there wasn't if there were going to be, they weren't going to go undefeated again. If they had a few issues in the cup competitions, I think they were in the semi-final League Cup, but another season without a cup, if you say it goes like that, questions begin to be asked. I mean, you could have done a clean sweep, you don't know. And it's that element of not knowing at Rangers, but still having that credit in the bank to throw out to potential suitors at this stage. I think, as I said, no chance he was going to turn it down. I think for him, it's a very good career move back in the Premier League. You look in terms of, we've mentioned him previously, whether by mistake by me on one occasion or whether by truth, Frank Lampard. In terms of that type of category manager, they're not going to get a job in the Premier League because of success in Liverpool, Man United. They're not going to drop down. They're going to come and have a go at Villa. And from what I've seen, you wouldn't expect Gerrard to come out joining Villa and saying, well, they're a stepping stone or, they're a shit tip or anything like that. But he's saying the right things, and I suppose that brings me nicely on to, at time of recording, the press conference for the Brighton game hasn't happened yet, but he has had his initial conference in terms of meeting the media earlier on in the week. Seen on our Twitter page at Talk Trinity, you were quite impressed by what he was saying?
Yeah, definitely. It was, when you listen to Steven Gerrard, he makes you take notice of what he's saying, and he was very honest in his approach in regards to, he didn't feel that he had a lot of time to implement improvements into the team before Saturday. And I think the person who was interviewing him, she said, well, is there anything that you've noticed about the team? He went, well, I'm not going to go into that, but we definitely need to shore up the defence and the strikers need to score more. You thought, well, you've been doing your homework then this weekend. You've been watching back over our last few games or whatnot. The one refreshing thing, and it's very much a stock comment. It's one of those football manager press conference type of comments whenever you get a new job, and a lot of fans will go, oh yeah, he's just saying that. I'm the same, but I'm very excited by the stock comment, which was, as soon as I heard Villa were interested, I wanted the job. I knew I had to go there. And that just got me thinking, well, yeah, we've lured Steven Gerrard. Steven Gerrard, the manager, hasn't really done it yet. He's done very well at Scotland, as you outlined, but he hasn't really done it yet. But Steven Gerrard, the player, is a Premier League legend. He's a world-class player, going and winning the Champions League on a number of occasions, the UEFA Cup as well. Part of the England golden generation that never really took off as well as it should have done. But no, I am definitely excited, and I agree with you, just to backpedal a bit, it is the perfect time for him to jump ship and come to the Villa, because if this job had come up at the end of the season and we'd finished below expectations, and that's what I got rid of Dino, and all Gerrard had done this year was added a League Cup or a Scottish Cup to his achievements, if they'd have missed out to Celtic, would we really have been phoning him straight away and saying, we want you to be the manager? I don't think we would have. If he'd have won the league again and a cup, who else would have been phoning him up saying, here, Stevie, come and coach us in the Premier League? But definitely interesting, definitely exciting. especially when you do your research on the likes of Michael Beale, one of his first team coaches. Gary McAllister apparently said a lot of nice things to him. I think that's because Gary McAllister wants to start on Saturday and he probably could get into the team.
He's got half a chance based on the injuries we'll come on to later.
At the moment. But when you look at Gerrard and you see the formations he likes to play, it tends to be a 4-3-3. And he doesn't go for out-and-out wingers. He goes for inverted wingers. So he'll have Ryan Kemp on the wing. He's played Kamar Roof on the wing quite a bit on the right-hand side. And he's had Morales up front. It's quite a Liverpool style of play. Surprise, surprise. And no pun intended with that Cilla Black reference there either. Do you think the inverted wingers could work for us and work in the Premier... I mean, it can work in the Premier League. It works for Liverpool. They won the league with it. Could it work for us?
I think the squad that we've got, and we've touched upon it in a slightly different version of the 4-3-3, is set up to play 4-3-3. Yeah. I mean, we have got the tactical flexibility to play 3-5-2 when we have to. Didn't really work consistently for a variety of reasons that we touched upon in previous podcasts, but the potential is there, whether that's more time on the training field, a few extra players, different positions that may go down into the annuals of we'll never know, perhaps, depending on how it goes. Mm-hmm. But 4-3-3, you got your question of whether you play your front three, and so obviously you have the centrepiece who we will speculate on some names later on in terms of who we think is going to play on Saturday. But your two wider players, do you have them hugging the touchline, or do you have them playing quite narrow, as you mentioned, in terms of Liverpool? I think we've got the personnel to be able to do both.
Yeah.
And I think we will mix it up in terms of who's playing on a certain day. Because I think in terms of Ollie Watkins, for example, if it goes into what may happen, he's on the left and Ings plays up front, Watkins is going to want to cut in. And in that scenario, you probably wouldn't want Watkins hanging out on the wing. On the other side, you might have Traore or Trezeguet when he's fit. You might want them hanging out a bit more, but especially Trezeguet is always going to want to cut inside and try and get one in a corner. So I think it gives us that flexibility. I don't think we'll be as narrow as Liverpool in terms of their front three, but I think in terms of whether the 3-5-2 or the 4-3-3 debate, as it were, I think that's going to end it under Gerrard, and I think that works better for the team having that certainty, and also based on previous games, the team prefer to play 4-3-3. I think the players we've got, whether we want to look upon that in January or in the summer in terms of the transfer window, time will tell. Which one of the things that's been said about Gerrard as opposed to Dean Smith is because, you touched upon Gerrard, playing career, won trophies, England international, big name in terms of, world football, really, if we're being honest about it. One of the things I've heard from some quarters is that having Steven Gerrard in charge of Villa is going to make it easier or more likely of attracting higher calibre or bigger name, however you want to put it, players than Dean Smith. Do you think that's fair on Dean Smith? And do you think he's right in terms of that? Or in terms of looking at the last transfer window, for example, it wouldn't really matter who we had in charge based on having a director of football and the targets that they have in place, etc.
I think it does make a difference, the name of the manager. As you say, Johan Lange tends to do the majority of stuff. Whether Gerrard will be happy with that approach, because Smith was. Gerrard seems to be someone I understand who likes to be at the forefront of transfers and suggesting names, whereas I think Smith was more happy for Lange to come and suggest to him. For me, I look at it this way. If you're going after Spinazzola, for example, just throwing out a random name there, or Guerrero even, and it's a case of, Dean Smith's asked about your availability. Without being horrible to Dino, I think they'd probably be like, who? Oh, the Aston Villa manager. Aston Villa have asked about you. Whereas if it was Steven Gerrard's asked about your availability. Oh, for Villa. I think it would be a bit more... There'd be a bit more of a link because there is more panache behind the name Steven Gerrard, and that isn't anything against Smith. I think Smith was obviously a nice bloke. He was someone that the players trusted. He spoke to Bailey, Buendia, Young. He was the one who helped get them in after we'd initially tested the waters to see if they wanted to join. I imagine that Villa will have more of a shine to it now because of Steven Gerrard, and you'd know more so who the manager was straight away rather than thinking, oh, who's that again? And hopefully it does help with the higher calibre of players, but I think a lot of that, the Premier League is an amazing draw anyway to most players because of the money that there is and the coverage and how it can be a stepping stone to better teams in the Premier League and better teams around the world and getting into your international team. Emi Martinez is proof of that. I know he was in the Premier League, but coming and playing week in, week out, he's now Argentina's undisputed number one. I think that really for us to attract the top qualityist of players, it doesn't matter who our gaffer is, we've got to be showing ambition and we've got to be paying the wages and paying the fees to really start, as Danny Murphy would say, trying to break that ceiling that apparently is over us. I don't buy into it too much. Yes, the Sky Six are up there, but Leicester have shown over the last few years and West Ham last season that you can get in amongst the pack and ruffle it up. Why can't we? Why can't Steven Gerrard? I'd hope that he'd be able to attract a better calibre of player than a Ryan Kent, without being horrible to Ryan Kent or a Glenn Kamara. If someone said to you, he's after a left winger, he's after a defensive midfielder, they wouldn't be the first two names that you put on a sheet of paper and went, oh, you know, son, I really hope we get ex-Liverpool reject, blah-de-blah, or ex-Boavista reserve player. I don't know any ex-Boavista reserve players, but I hope we get them. Instead, you're now going to be thinking, oh, do you know what? Why wouldn't Bissouma want to come and join us? Why wouldn't a Souček want to come and join us? Why couldn't we go and knock on the door of Burnley and get Dwight McNeil now, or even some of those better players from around the rest of the Premier League? You know, you look at Patrick Vieira at Palace, he's obviously lured certain players in because of his name and beat a few other teams to the punch. So hopefully Gerrard can, but I think the name and where you are in the league has got just as much to do with that. Aston Villa, fifth from bottom, is nowhere near as attractive proposition as Aston Villa 10th in the league in January. Hopefully we can crack on and get up to that position.
I think that's ultimately it. In terms of, does Gerrard's name recognition help you in certain markets? I think it does. I mean, it is inevitable, especially in terms of the increasing role media plays in modern football. If you've got somebody who's a bankable name recognition already, then those column inches write themselves. But as you said, I think the most important thing is in terms of what's going on the pitch, and you could have, you know, if you're picking up the real top echelon of managers, you could have Jurgen Klopp, Guardiola in charge of Villa. If they're bottom of the league, then yeah, you might as well just put a sock puppet in charge in terms of all it would do in terms of attracting players, because it's not going to be enough by itself. So performances have to improve on the field to get up the table in terms of, well, January and beyond. And speaking of getting up the table, the first opportunity to do that comes Saturday, 3:00 at Villa Park, where we welcome Brighton. We'll be hearing from a Brighton fan later on in terms of their thoughts from the Brighton perspective. But the easy temptation, the easy lure for Gerrard's first game in charge, home crowd, is this is a pretty good game to pick.
You'd think so. I mean, Brighton are doing very well, obviously, and you'd hope that the new manager bounce would have been there against anyone. Obviously, you wouldn't be going, oh, I'm glad we got Man City in his first game, or oh, I'm glad we got Liverpool in his first game.
Remy Gard was. That was his best game, wasn't it?
Probably. He did win one, didn't he, against Norwich?
Beat Palace.
Yeah, that was it. I'm thinking of someone else with Norwich, aren't I?
You can always tell you've had a bad season where you can remember the wins, because they were that few.
I mean, let's be honest with you. And when you look at the two dugouts on Saturday, I bet there's a lot of Villa fans who are thinking, I wouldn't have minded Potter in the claret and blue for us, but I'm glad we got Gerrard. You know that. It'll be an interesting game, and it's definitely a winnable game for him. Regardless of the new manager bounce, it's a winnable game. It's one of the ones when you looked at the 4 games as we suspected Dino would have, which it didn't turn out to be. Brighton was definitely one of the ones where we thought, oh, we could get something there. We could probably get a win. Same with Southampton. West Ham, no, I don't think either of us thought we'd get anything against them, really. And Palace, well, that's anybody's guess at the moment. But for a first game at home, that's the type of match that you want if you can't have Norwich at home. And it's probably a good job we didn't get Norwich at home, to be honest with you. Interestingly, it's once again, for the second time in a row, the new Villa manager comes up against Graham Potter in his first game in charge, because Smith had Potter Swansea. We beat them 1-0. Potter at the time said we could have beaten them by a lot more. I definitely think we can do something against them. Gerrard obviously is going to be thinking we've got certain elements of the team that we really need to sort out first and get on top of to get some sort of result. And for me, it's the defence that needs the most work straight away, and hoping that Emi Martinez isn't too tired to play. What about you? Do you think it's a good start for us?
I think you mentioned, apart from like Norwich or Bomb, it is a great game. If you're doing your on paper, and football isn't one on paper, but Brighton aren't on a good run, I don't think. It depends how stats, you can prove anything. You can say, they haven't lost in a huge number of games, but I don't think they've won since the start of October or even into September. They haven't won like in the last 6 or somewhere around there. They've only lost 1, so you can say they're hard to beat, or they're struggling to get results because they're averaging about a goal a game in terms of goals scored, averaging a goal a game in terms of goals conceded. So they're very solid, consistent.
So you're saying it's going to be 1-1?
No, but in terms of Graham Potter, you mentioned in terms of if it would have been the other way round, in terms of if we would have just got rid of Gerrard, I think Potter would have been in more of a shout, because in terms of you usually go for somebody opposite, and I think the Potter's, fault's the wrong word, but he was similar to Dean Smith, and it's like, we've got rid of a Dean Smith type manager, so we need to go do something else. Funnily enough, speaking of Dean Smith and first games up, obviously he's been appointed Norwich City manager this week. Do you know who Norwich's first game under Dean Smith is?
It's the very first time it's happened in Premier League history. Southampton.
It is. What a good... Well, he's got no excuse for not knowing how Southampton line up and kind of tactically. And maybe the advice would be, lads, just see out the first 5 minutes. Don't concede a goal. But going back to events at Villa Park, very winnable game, as you said, against Brighton. You mentioned the defence does need tightening up. I mean, I think when you're looking back and going, you only conceded 1 in the game against Southampton, that was quite good. That's when you know there's been issues. If you were being extra harsh about Dean Smith looking over the reign as a whole, the defence was a problem in the first season of the Premier League. Had support during lockdown to kind of identify that and just about steer the ship away from the iceberg that was relegation. But without that support, you could say this time around the defence is, you look at the stats in terms of goals conceded, chances given up as well. Sometimes you can have a situation whereby you take a game in isolation. Some people may say, "Oh, West Ham, you're never going to get, or too often, people hitting them from 30 yards going in. It just doesn't happen. So it could be a one-off." But in terms of the stats, number of shots faced, that is one metric we are top 5 in terms of that. And you're talking about Gerrard doing the homework, as it were. You don't need to do much homework to figure out that if you concede in goals and you concede in shots, you're probably not going to be doing very well. So that definitely needs to be tightened up. The Dean Smith era ended with some minor controversy, if I can call it that, in terms of Tyrone Mings being dropped from the game against West Ham, came back in against Southampton because of the suspension of Konza. In terms of the first steps of Gerrard tightening up that defence, do you see anything else apart from a backline of Konza and Mings?
No, I don't. I think it's helped Mings in many ways, being dropped for that game, because it really spurs him on to want to impress this new manager. He wants to show him that he's the right choice to be captain. Though, something to ponder, and maybe people can leave a comment below or let us know on Twitter what they think. I was wondering about Tyrone Mings the other day, not in any sort of weird way, but I was thinking, quick player across the ground, good in the air as well, got a great quarterback pass on him, very much like John Terry used to have. There was talk that John Terry, when he went to Forest, should have been played as a DM because he could hit diagonal balls with his right foot and his left foot. He's a leader, he's a talker, he's a battler, he'll stay back. Is Tyrone Mings playing in the right position at centre-back? Now, I'm not going to ask you about left-back. I'm going to say, should he be playing in front of the back four? Potentially, you've got a three-man midfield, and we know that Douglas Luiz plays that deep-lying playmaker. Could Ming step in there as a captain in front of Konsa and Twanzebe, someone to drop into the defence if one of them have to push out wide, a bit like Eric Dyer at Tottenham. I mentioned him a few times from that Pochettino era with Alderweireld and Vertonghen. I wonder whether he'd add a little bit of steel there and have a bit more about him on the pitch. I imagine that if you said to Tyrone Mings now, I want to play you in this new position, he'd go, clear off, I'm third choice England centre half.
Yep.
San
Marino goal scorer extraordinaire.
Yeah, I do wonder though whether there's the potential there for a Tyrone Mings dropping in to defensive mid until at least, we go and purchase somebody in the January window.
I do think it's an interesting point, actually, because we have mentioned previously when talking about starting 11s and such things about the lack of true defensive midfielders we've got in the squad, really, apart from Nakamba. So looking for alternative options, as you say, to tide us over to January. He does have in his locker, as you mentioned, some of the ability to play defensive midfield. In terms of breaking down your question, could I see him playing defensive midfield? Yes. Could I see him playing defensive midfield at this stage of the season? I think it would be tricky. It's a real kind of... It seems like, you're only like 10 foot further forward on a pitch. How hard can it be? Yeah, I mean, we saw in terms of... It's a slightly different context, but Alexander-Arnold played right midfield for England in a game, and that got changed after 45 minutes. I think it was a friendly, just because playing right back, right midfield, even though you're on the same side of the pitch, in theory doing the same things, completely different scenario. I don't know, England, different players from Liverpool, etc., etc. But in principle, as you said, he's got the leadership, which you kind of traditionally want somebody in the middle of the park who's going to do that. I've got no idea what his shot's like in terms of whether we're going to be expecting too many goals from him, but we weren't really expecting any from Nakamba.
I mean, if he pushes further forward, he'd get his head on a couple of things, potentially.
Yeah, and it's... To nick a Gary Neville quote, it could be a bit like a PlayStation kind of player controlling that in the defence midfield. And with Nakamba, some of the criticisms are, just short sideways passes. I'll be worried about Mings going backwards and then where that going in terms of some of the well-mentioned potential for rickets that we mentioned previously. But, you're looking in terms of an opening 2 games of the Gerrard reign, Brighton, Palace. If you are going to try it out, it's not bad. I mean, especially Palace away, that you're expecting that's going to be a physical game, and him in the centre of the park could say hello to his new mucker, Conor Gallagher, kind of in there. So, I think with the right training on the training field, I do think it's not something to be ruled out for a long period of time. We'll see what happens if we did play it against Brighton. If we do play it, it's
food for thought.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, they say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. So having somebody with that outside the box and such cliched thinking, basically what we're saying is we're going to see you in the dugout on Saturday, new executive title, coach with a clipboard, just kind of...
Well, I had to nip off during that podcast with Dave and Russell. Surprise!
Well, there we go. I mean, we are always bringing you, the latest developing news at Villa and the new addition to the coaching staff.
Mate, I'd love it. I mean, for me, I'd try in an FA Cup game if we got a Rochdale in the cup. Why not? The problem there is who do you put at centre-back? I mean, Courtney Coles is the likely option because of his left foot, Twanzebe, potentially, Bogard, if it's the cup. But we're not talking about that at the moment anyway. We're talking about Brighton. And I can't see Tyrone Mings playing in that role against Brighton. I honestly don't know who it will be because there's rumours that Dougie's out injured and Nakamba as well. Yeah,
so it looking like in terms of turning our attention towards a potential starting 11, it may almost be by default who's fit in terms of and who's coming back from international duty fit, or even within the right time frame ahead of the game to be able to give the proverbial 100% on the pitch. So we mentioned in terms of probably thinking Mings and contemplating centre back, subject to potentially a new dawn for Mings playing defensive midfield. Martinez, as we said, we expect him to be in goal if he's back in time and fit. Poland's Matty Cash, expect he'll be playing right back.
I thought so.
Left back's going to be an interesting one. I mean, we've touched upon it a few times during the course of the season. Target's first choice left back, bit uneasy, some Villa fans, in terms of him being first choice. Realistically, it's him or Ashley Young. Gerrard name-checked Ashley Young as somebody he'd played with previously.
Yep.
Is that saying hello to a friend, or do you think that is an insight into Gerrard potentially lining us up to play Young at left-back?
I think the way that he had Rangers set up, and from chatting to a Rangers fan on Twitter, he was saying that he likes those inverted forwards so that the fullbacks can really push on and they can join the attack, they can overlap. Centre midfielders can then pull out if they need to cover. Matty Target had great link-up play with Jack Grealish and with Ross Barkley to a point. You look at Arsenal away to 3-0 where we went to the capital and absolutely smashed them. But for me, Matty Cash isn't quite good enough. Whether that's his form at the moment, I don't know. I've never been a massive Matty Cash fan. I was a massive Matty Cash fan when he scored the winner against Brighton.
Sorry,
Matt
so we're not
Target.
confusing
I
listeners.
love Matty Cash.
I mean, that is a really...
I love Matt Cash.
I mean, Mings defensive mid, Cash out the club. I mean, man, the power has gone to your head in terms of your new role.
I'm telling you, I'm fed up of him. No, sorry, Matty Cash. I love Matty Cash. Matty Target form or whatnot. I've never been a massive fan, apart from when he scored that winner against Brighton, when he scored against Leicester as well in the semi-final of the Cup. I would go with Ashley Young because he's got all the natural qualities of an out-and-out winger, and if Gerrard is looking for that, then Young is the best person. Okay, he's going to have to cut back in onto his right quite a bit, but some of the best left-backs in the world were right-footed, Philip Lahm, for example, and Young brings a leadership to the team. He'll talk to people through the game. He's captained the club before. He's been... He won a league title last year for Inter Milan, playing as a wing-back, which effectively, I think, is what, attacking-wise, Gerrard wants his full-backs to do. So for me, it's Ashley Young. I don't know about you.
I'd play Young. I mean, I think in terms of some of our predictions for teams during the course of this season, where mine have increasingly become more unpopular as time has gone on. Well, one of the constants I've had is to play Young at left back. I think we need to put him there just to see what we got, really. And in terms of...
Or Matty Cash.
Well, after you've grovelled to get him back into the club, maybe...
You can play right back and left back.
Play wherever you play, defensive mid, play anywhere. So moving on to that midfield, we've touched upon Nakamba may be injured at time of recording. It's not clear whether he's going to play at time of recording. Douglas Luiz may be injured.
Yeah.
So, subject to those,
Sanson's in Paris.
He's trying to win a stuffed animal at Disneyland Paris, kind of, from what I heard. Just imagining each one of those. I don't know if it's coconuts you throw now, well, whatever, or beanbags. Imagine each one's Dean Smith. He's throwing it out there. So, in terms of that midfield three, and we're assuming it's a midfield three based on what we were saying earlier in terms of the formation Gerrard likes to play, who do you think is going to be in that three? Is it going to be who is just going to be fit?
I think he could spring a surprise in that holding midfield position. And I'm going purely off the little 2-minute 31-second video that Villa put up of Gerrard on his first day. Gary McAllister's in with a shout, though he might rest him for this game. We've got bigger games coming up.
Gordon Strachan's available.
Well, yeah. I mean, Gerrard himself, potentially. If Sanson's fit, I'd imagine that he goes in. Or, Dougie Luiz, but we're ruling him out at the moment. I wouldn't be surprised to maybe see a Twanzebe there. He's played there previously for United. I think he was at reserve or under 23 levels. Or he's got quite a few youth players training with him at the moment. We've seen Cameron Archer, Jaden Villigence-Badace in the training videos. We've also seen, and I'm going to massacre his surname, Tim Eobum, the lad we got from West Brom, who's meant to be a real talent. He's got a hell of a pass on him. He's got a great driving run from the games that I've seen him in for the younger Villa sides this season. I wonder whether, and just so I don't embarrass myself again, whether they put Tim there.
Well, Tim, he may... Certainly nice, may or may not be dim. That's a reference for our older listeners over the age of 40.
Oh, I missed
it. But in terms of... You do usually get that with a new manager. A surprise, a selection, a bit left field. So I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, in terms of injury issues on the field for Villa, technical issues in the studio here, trying to load up good old internet to try and get that name in front of us, so we can have a go at trying to pronounce it. We got it up now. I don't know if that's going to help you.
Erogbunum. That's what I'm going with Tim. Still,
he's got a rogue name.
I'd potentially have Tim there if Sanson or Luiz aren't available, and then Jacob Ramsey's got to be starting. Jacob Ramsey adds a drive to the midfield. He's got a creativity, not too dissimilar to Steven Gerrard. I mean, he's not on the same class yet, but he'll get forward. He wants to score goals. And we know that Stevie G is a massive fan of John McGinn. Old quotes have come up how he said about how John McGinn's one of your perfect midfielders. He wished he could have got him for Rangers before he came to Villa. I think it's going to be Ramsey, McGinn, and then Sanson or Tim.
From Ramsey's perspective, what a perfect player to learn from. Manager Gerrard, from his playing experience. I agree with you. I think Ramsey plays. McGinn definitely plays. I think if he's fit. Then that final role, Sanson, if he's fit, that's going to be the surprise role, even if Sanson is fit, I'd say. Just because of it's not nailed down that position.
Yeah.
I mean, we've thrown a few names around, so I mean, I'm sure Gerrard's got some ideas of his own. Maybe speaking to McAllister, see if Robert Pires is still knocking around. But in terms of the front three, again, we're assuming it's going to be a front three, whether that's narrow or wider in terms of out-and-out wingers. Who do you see in terms of, again, subject to injuries and who's going to be fit, leading the line and in support of the man up front?
I think the man up front is Danny Ings, known to Steven Gerrard, so why not him? And then with him being up front, I go with Bailey on the right-hand side, if Bailey's available. And on the left-hand side, if we're going for inverted wingers, because I'm really not sure what foot he kicks with, I'm probably going with Emi Buendia on that left-hand side. I mean, he scored that cracking goal against Brentford. He's shown glimpses as well of what he can do. And Bailey, I'd put onto the right side because that's where he was mainly for Leverkusen, cutting inside, hitting shots, tremendous efforts where he'd bend the ball around the keeper into the far corner. Though we have such an abundance of talent that can play on the right when you include Traore, who's very much an inverted winger. We've got Trezeguet coming back from injury, nowhere near fit yet. And then you see in the training videos, there's Viligence, Bidace and El Ghazi also. But for me, Buendia, Ings and Bailey would be my front three. Watkins is out of the team at the moment.
I think it's an interesting one, Buendia, just because he has been played in multiple positions since he's joined the Villa. And that is always going to be difficult.
Defensive mid.
Well, we're auditioning everybody for the job there tonight. But if you're especially if you're in a struggling team, which, well, we have been, frankly, for at least the last 5 games, and in terms of consistent performance, maybe a little before that, it is difficult to come in and still be like the star performer in the majority of those positions. And for the amount of money we spent for him as well, record signing. Yeah. I mean, it's almost overlooked, really, in terms of, because so much has happened since then. There is a lot of pressure. I mean, I am tempted in terms of he played on the opposite flank, the right flank for Norwich. There's a temptation to think, just get him settled there, to begin with. But then, as you said, we have got Bailey in terms of whether to get him settled as well. You want him playing in
2 right wingers.
Yeah, his natural position. So I think the general consensus, especially in the last game against Southampton, was Bailey doesn't offer you as much defensively as Buendia does. Is that going to be a factor in terms of whether to play one or the other? Not on Saturday necessarily, but moving forward, do you go more defensively solid or rely upon that flair moment from Bailey, counteracting maybe the couple of extra chances you may concede as a result of being higher up the pitch? I think it's an interesting one in terms of, I think we're both probably in agreement Ings plays up front in terms of the central position. There's talks in terms of fitness. I think we're talking about shocks or surprises in terms of selection. I wouldn't be surprised if this is where the shock came in terms of who is going to be playing on one of those inverted or potentially wider positions.
Yeah.
I can see a Village and Bidace playing.
Yeah.
In terms of, I can see Gerrard kind of, you can imagine the team talk now, arm around the shoulder, go and show me what you got. I don't know if he calls people son, Gerrard, in terms of that nowadays, but because there hasn't really been anybody, I mean, we've talked about Bailey wanted him in the team over a number of podcasts. There's been nobody who you can say has nailed their position on either, whether it's flank, whether it's inverted.
Mm-hmm.
If there is going to be a curveball, I can see it there. I'd be surprised if El Ghazi played, based on what happened last time, potentially. But Viligence Bidace, I mean, if he plays, which wing is he playing on? Is it going to be a curveball on a curveball in terms of maybe playing him on a potentially different flank from where you'd expect him?
I mean, for me, if you want 2 wingers who are going to get back and defend, if that's what Gerrard's after, then you're right about Bailey. There was talk on his Instagram account from his father that he got flu when he played against Southampton, so he wasn't so well. El Ghazi, first half was terrible. You'd take second half El Ghazi over him every day of the week, and that wasn't much better, but it was more of the let's just shoot from anywhere FIFA Ultimate Team El Ghazi. If you want two wingers who will get back and defend, it's Buendia and Fulgence Bidace, and I don't think Fulgence Bidace is a bad shout. You remember that Steven Gerrard was in the same team as a young Raheem Sterling at Liverpool and would have seen the impact that he made as a teenager. Put the ball to his feet and he took the world on, and look how good he's become, you know. Fulgence Bidace, if he does start, for me, I'm going against what I've just said with the whole Buendia on the left, but I'd have Fulgence Bidace on the left because I put Ashley Young at left back, who can talk him through the game, who can make him get back, tell him when to push on, do a bit of give and go. You've also got Tyrone Mings over on that left side, being a left centre-back who can talk to him as well, and he's very vocal. And Buendia and Cash have got a very good link-up at the moment. We saw that against West Ham for the goal that we scored, with the little ball to Buendia, the turn, and then cross back for Watkins. So if there aren't really any standout players, but there are some players who are starting to link up and that could ignite a spark somewhere else on the pitch, then why not stick with those? And we both said Danny Ings up top. Steven Gerrard knows Danny Ings. Danny Ings knows Gerrard from their time at Liverpool. Okay, Ings didn't play too much, but he would know the standards that Gerrard expects as a player, which would be the same, if not higher, as a manager, especially after coming off the back of an invincible season, one defeat in the league in over 50 matches for them. I think Fulgence Bidace could be a great shout. Another potential for you, I mean, we've mentioned potentially Tim as a DM, and we've talked about JJ. Could AJ or Carney get into the side in centre midfield? I don't think they play alongside JJ. I think they'd have to play alongside McGinn. But could one of those youngsters get in?
Possibly. I mean, I suppose it depends how adventurous you're going to be from an attacking perspective for Gerrard. The fact that AJ hasn't started a game in the Premier League, my thought in terms of Fulgence Bidace is further up the pitch, it's easier, you know, in terms of, you mentioned having Young talking to him to bring him back, Mings talking to him. I think, you know, they're good points and would veer towards more putting him on the left. But there's a long, Mass fans and Shape fans will tell you, there's a long way to get from your penalty area to the other penalty area for other players to potentially cover up, you know, a lack of experience or missing out. The margin for error in the centre midfield is a little less. Though we did, you know, you mentioned Chukwuemeka, he did play against Brentford in that centre midfield. Decent. I think our thought of the time was, you know, not terrible, not brilliant, but, you know, 17-year-old thrown in the team relatively late, you know, due to various injury-related issues. We'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
Would playing both Ramseys together, if you were going to do that, is that going to lift both of them, or is that going to potentially put the pressure on both of them in a situation, a game whereby the pressure is going to be relatively high anyway for a first game?
It puts the pressure on them, but I think it also lifts them because they want to one-up each other or really show the Premier League what the Ramsey brothers can do. I mean, AJ is meant to be better than JJ, and JJ was going and bossing it for England under-21s in midweek. I think John McGinn starts. If you do have both Ramseys, then McGinn maybe plays that deeper role, but I wouldn't put him there. So, no, yeah, I think JJ, for me, starts over his brother with McGinn, and then Sanson or Tim as the holding. Just thinking back to Fulgence Bidace as well, the good thing for him is if he is on the wing, where you mentioned it's easier because you've got the you're a bit more up the other end of the pitch, where if a mistake happens, it doesn't tend to get instantly punished. He's playing on the wing and he's running past the dugouts. He's got that constant support from the gaffer, from the coaching staff as well. And if he's doing well on the left wing attacking the North Stand in the first half, it might be that Gerrard says, okay, well, you know, we've helped you through this game, so you're switching to the right wing in the second half, so we can carry on talking you through the game as you go and attack the whole end. And it also mixes it up a bit because their left back now thinks, well, I thought I was going to have Buendia to mark. But
yeah, I mean, good problems to have, and I think we've touched upon it in previous podcasts. The younger players coming through are cause for optimism, regardless of who's in charge of where we're going on in the field. But bringing it back slightly closer to the present day, in terms of the result on Saturday, how do you see it going?
I think that the new manager has an effect on us. He's got to get off to a positive start, or whether that's playing really attractive football and we lose 1-0. Though I said before, I'd rather have boring football and win 1-0 every week, because at least you're winning. I do think that we get the win though. I'm going to go for a 2-1 Villa. We've got to beat someone at some time.
Said Remy Gard.
Well, he did get one, didn't he? And I think with Tyrone Mings as our defensive midfielder and Matty Cash everywhere on the pitch. No, in all seriousness, I think Cash is going to be buoyed by the fact he's been selected for Poland. You're going to have a lot of other players who are out there looking to impress. Steven Gerrard. The fans are going to be there to lift the team. They're not going to get on their back as much this game, you'd hope. I think we get a 2-1 win, and I think Danny Ings is back amongst the goals.
Yep, I mean, in terms of, we like to bring you the well thought out, the studied insight here on Talk of the Trinity. Based on absolutely nothing that I could justify, I think we'll win 2-0.
Ah, we've lost.
And that is always why I do reluctantly always predict us to win, because I backed us to beat Newcastle. I think that's the only one I think so far that I've backed. But we have only won 3.
So you said we'd lose to Barrow.
Well, you know, if VAR was in operation, you know, at least 5 of those goals would have been chalked off, and then we would have been a battle. But yeah, I do think the first game bounce is going to play into it. I think the fact that the crowd are going to be up for it. I think it's going to be a celebration, also a bit of a remembrance as well as Dean Smith. I think, you know, there'll be, you know, respects paid. You know, I mean, obviously he's managing against Southampton. It's not like worse things have happened. Yeah. But I think that will be, you know, in the atmosphere as well. I think we'll touch upon this more in the next segment. I think playing Brighton now as compared to a month ago, I think is better for us, because, you know, they've only lost a couple of games this season, but they haven't won very many. A lot of draws against teams who they probably should beat, which is exactly what I'm going to think about Villa, I would say, in terms of a team they should beat. And I think that's going to go into our favour. And yeah, I agree. I think Ings, if he is the main man up front, which I think he should be, I think he's getting back on the score sheet. I mean, he's had a rest for whatever reason you may have heard or speculated upon, but yes, I think along with you that we're going to win. So I'm accepting no responsibility for when we lose 5-0.
I just want to see Steven Gerrard get as excited as he did in that Old Firm clash at Celtic Park, where all the gifts come from, where he's, come on, into the camera. He doesn't do it in that accent, he does it in a Scouse accent. But no, I'm positive again. I am very positive. Though one person who won't be sharing positivity is our guest, AD from the Albion Roar podcast, which is a dedicated Brighton and Hove Albion podcast. So now I'm going to pass you over to Baz to do the introductions ahead of our chat with him. And there you go. My opinion is 2-1 Villa win. Barrett's opinion, a 2-0 Villa win, and AD says that Brighton are going to spoil Steven Gerrard's big day out with a late 1-0 winner. However, we want to hear your predictions, so either tweet us at Talk Trinity or drop a comment on our YouTube video. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on notifications as well. If you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, Google, Stitcher or on a different podcast provider, thank you for your support. It is most appreciated. Until then, here's hoping that Steven Gerrard gets a much needed win on his debut so that we can review the Brighton game full of joy in our hearts and also look ahead to the big game between Patrick Vieira and Steven Gerrard, those midfield Premier League legends, with some hope in our heart as well. Once again, thank you for listening. Cheers, Tar. Thank you very much. And up the Villa.